In a single day, countless towers began to appear all over the world. No one knew how or why it happened, according to some people, who weren't lucky enough to be around. The filling of these towers was closely related to mythology. It's like someone copied all the myths and legends of the world and put them inside. Some people were even happy to meet the heroes of their favorite legends. But for the rest of humanity, it brought nothing but trouble. Dungeons and monsters began to appear more and more frequently around the towers, and to protect the world from their influence, the Chosen Ones began to analyze and cleanse the dungeons. They were the only thing standing between humanity and the monsters, and they called them adventurers. Each of the adventurers was a true hero, and a world star with unique abilities. Since childhood, our hero has admired the strength and courage of adventurers. No wonder, because they were real superheroes. Every kid wanted to be an adventurer, but Gene wasn't like other kids. He didn't just dream of being an adventurer. He began to aspire to it. Becoming an adventurer was the main goal of his life. And to achieve this goal, he studied like a cursed man. All day long, all he did was study the basics of magic and adventurism. Since the adventurers, it's been quite some time, so there was more than enough suitable literature. Gene spent more than 7 years studying all the literature, and when he had read almost all the books in the country, he finally got into the Hero Academy. The written exam is the best. From that moment on, his lifelong dream became a reality. But first, he had to graduate from the academy. At first, his studies seemed very simple, but he soon learned that there were obstacles that he could never overcome. No matter how much he practiced, his case didn't get any better. His speed scores weren't increasing at all, and his stamina seemed to be decreasing. After a couple of semesters at the academy, he decided to leave. After all, he didn't have the skill that adventurers are known for. It had been 2 years since Jin had left the academy. During that time, he regretted 1,000 times that he had dropped out of the academy. But common sense told him that if he continued to study, he wouldn't be able to become an adventurer anyway. Instead of reaching for his dreams, he started writing fictional stories. All of his stories were directly about adventurers, their exploits. Jin's favorite novels were stories about a swordsman who could cut the horizon with a single swing. The story of a hunter who spent his life in the forest of death and the creators of magic. Gino was always describing things he couldn't accomplish in real life. Today, he finishes his best work yet. About 7 heroes. These stories he doesn't publish, he writes them for himself, diving into his own thoughts and fantasies. While writing this story, Jin didn't realize he'd been sitting at his laptop half the night. And after finishing the final edits, he decided to take a little rest. But before he fell asleep, Jin turned on the TV. Because he couldn't sleep in a dark room. Because of his constant nightmares. Meanwhile, there was a breaking news program on TV. The world's only sacred hero, Rachel, has just completed a mission to the US and is returning to Korea. She has single-handedly cleared several dungeons. The frustrating thing is, Rachel wasn't much older than Jean. And she graduated from the same academy that our hero had once dropped out of. After learning about Rachel, Jean wondered why he didn't have the skills. After all, he's sure he's put in a lot more effort than everyone else. Anyway, he didn't want to think about it. After all, he'd decided long ago that he wasn't going to be an adventurer. So, there was no point in thinking about it. When suddenly, in the middle of the night, when Jean was already asleep, his laptop turned on, and on it, strange messages started coming in. The world is on the lookout for stories for new towers. The world has discovered a suitable setting to use in towers. The world begins to form new towers with a similar setting. And after a few minutes of loading, the last message appeared. The world has created a new tower. Early in the morning, Jean woke up to the TV starting to make noises too loud. That was another breaking news report. The reporter said that there were 5 new towers in Korea at once. What monsters in them dwell, and what complexity of them is still unknown. However, this news appeared immediately with the title. The first tower was called Sword Splits the Horizon. The second tower, Devil Mercenary. The third tower, Black Divine Spear. All these towers, they all bear the same names as Jean's novels. Adventurers, I suppose, are the most elaborate towers that ever existed. Jean realized that it couldn't be a coincidence to have new towers and efforts named after his heroes. So he decided to check his laptop. When he opened it, he saw that none of his work was there, when suddenly, a game window opened up for Gino. It said that the novel Age of Destruction had been chosen by the world, and its history were used to create new towers. At this news, Jin was truly terrified. After all, he had become the culprit of a new threat to humanity. But there's a silver lining to all of this. Jin knows what to expect in this dungeon. And also, he now has his own adventurer's window. And so what we have here is that the files of his novels are gone. And the news said there were new towers named after his characters. But that's not the most interesting part. Jin has discovered a unique class skill, namely, the immersion skill. It's surprising that Jin got this skill. After all, he's a man without any talent. And this skill is so unique. Knowledge, new dungeons, and the emergence of this skill opens up a real horizon of possibilities for the genie. Now he can become a true adventurer. But it wasn't as easy as he'd hoped. Jin had lost count of how many times he had tried to activate this skill in the last few days. And every time he tried to do it, the system gave him an error. The reasons for the failure were several. Firstly, there was a big difference in characteristics. Secondly, the system did not understand the nature of the target. And third, the emotions of the target could not be determined. In other words, Jin can't activate this skill yet, because he's too weak and can't control his internal energy. Emotions, character, feelings, desires, test scores, personality type, hopes, love. You'll have to figure it all out to learn how to use your new power. I get all that, but the question is how to do it. Suddenly, some girl came up to the genie and excitedly shouted, "Appa, isn't that you?" Jin turned around and saw Serene standing in front of him. She had been his neighbor for years, and she's also a student at the academy with a unique skill called Ice World. She has a good chance of becoming a high-ranking adventurer after graduation. They became close when Jin helped her with her studies at her mom's request. They went to the academy together, but they hardly spoke to each other during their studies. She'd taken a little academic leave right after enrollment, but honestly Jin had tried to avoid seeing her, because he was afraid she'd find out the rumors that were going around about him. LM Saren seemed genuinely happy to see him. But as she approached him, she smelled a strong odor of alcohol. She leaned over and said, "Hey Jin, why do you smell like that? Can you at least buy yourself some food?" "I just came to get it," Jin replied. Trying to change the subject, Jin asked the girl how she was doing at the academy. "I'm doing well, I'm one of the best, and you're pretty well known throughout the academy." There was a rumor that Jin was being recruited by the Heavenly Palace Guild. And suddenly the girl said, "You know, they don't invite just anyone to be an analyst. The Heavenly Palace Guild is one of the 3 strongest guilds in Korea. You can never get in with just good grades. That's why everyone knows someone who refused the offer of such a guild."
As you have already realized, Jin was one of those who refused such a guild. This is a story he doesn't want to tell anyone.
When suddenly Jin felt something strange and sinister. And then an information window appeared saying that the author of the story felt the energy of Everton. Everton is another character from his short stories. In the novella, he was one of the Demon Lord's followers. How could a demon follower be in a regular supermarket in the middle of the city? Seeing Jin's worried face, Lee Saren said excitedly, "What's wrong with you? Are you not feeling well? Maybe I can help you." Before Jin could answer, Everton fell unconscious to the ground, scaring the customers of the store. The girl even wanted to help the stranger. But Jin stopped her, as suddenly, a black aura resembling mist began to seep out from the Erwin's body. The aura was greatly intensifying with each passing second, and Jin received a notification that a demon follower was summoning blood wolves. A moment later, the aura transformed into a kind of portal, from which a pack of bloody wolves ran out. The people around them, struggling to save their lives, flee, and following the wolves out of the portal was a group of people who hated the 7 heroes. They were willing to sacrifice anything for their cause. Jin called them demon worshippers. Seeing the men in robes, Jin didn't doubt for a second that it was them. When she saw the monsters, the girl shouted, "Jin! We need to save all the people immediately. They're in there." She must have completely forgotten that Jin has absolutely no skills whatsoever. But that wasn't a problem for our hero. And then he shouted, "Saren, I'll distract the wolves! Protect the humans!" Jin knew he couldn't fight the monsters, but he could help by doing what he does best, which is to run. Only the blood wolves thought otherwise. Within seconds, they had our hero surrounded. And that's when Jin was notified that he had been targeted by the monsters. Not a second later, the wolf pounced on the genie with distraught eyes. This attack was quite predictable, so Jin was able to dodge it. But still the wolf managed to wound his cheek. Our hero realized that if this continued, he would never get out of here alive. He grabbed the first thing that came to hand and defended himself with it. But after the wolf's first attack, it was clear that the stick wouldn't last long. There's no way this stick can take another hit. Well, what to do in this situation, because Saren cannot come to his aid. She protects people. And then Jin shouted with all his might, "Dive!" This time, his attempt was successful, and the dive was successful. But before this skill can be activated, the system must download memories of the original story into Jin, his novel, the events he has been presenting for the past 2 years. The world and the characters. He knows everything about them. Then, Jin decided to borrow the power of a horizon-slashing swordsman. When the downloading of memories was complete, Jin shouted again, "Dive!" However, the difference between a genie and a horizon-splitting swordsman was too great. And in the case of a dive, the chance of dying was 100%. That's a pain in the ass. He can't immerse himself in his own character because he's too weak. As suddenly, the system offered the genie a choice of another character he could immerse himself in. And that's when the genie had his epiphany. There was a reason why the system was downloading memories into him. All he has to do is choose a character to help him fight the bloody wolves. And luckily, there was such a character. And this time, the dive was 100% successful. Towers are a combination of reality and myths. For example, if the tower is based on a base in Greek mythology, and the owner is Hercules, then all the events that happened in his myths become reality. And right now, the characters in his novel have gotten their own towers, which means that all the people associated with him and now exist in reality. Even the simplest of background characters, such as Soldier Milam. In Jin's short stories, he was a regular gatekeeper whose name no one will remember. The main task of the Guardian is to defeat a superior number of opponents with little force. Jin was finally able to use his unique skill. But the important thing was that it would now save his life. Thanks to the knowledge and power of the Guardian Melam, the Bloodhounds were no more than a toy to the genie, whom he killed with a single blow, armed with nothing but a steel stick. During the battle, the system notified Jin that his spear skill had been upgraded, and temporarily activated his maneuvering skill. Thanks to that, our hero took down an entire monster without any trouble. I wonder what it would be like to feel that kind of power as an ordinary person. Even the wolves could sense his power. And despite the fact that these monsters tend to attack an enemy stronger than them, this time, the wolves decided to retreat. But Jin's not gonna just let a blood wolf go. If he's going to do it, he's going to see it through. Meanwhile, Lee Saren had already frozen all the monsters that threatened the humans. I have to admit, her skills really are quite impressive. I can see why she's one of the Academy's top students. After the wolves were done, the girl decided to come to Jin's aid. But when she turned around, she saw that he had done just fine on his own. After the battle, the immersion automatically shut down, and Jin once again became a normal person. As soon as the skill stopped working, Jin fell to the floor. Apparently diving takes too much physical energy. But even so, he was insanely happy, because now he knew how to use this skill. Jin had studied the fighting technique. Now all the muscles in his body would be used more efficiently. But since his body wasn't able to withstand that kind of force, the system forcibly increased the recoil. It was for this reason that Jin fell to the floor like a statue. Because every muscle in his body began to vibrate from such a force. It was a very squirrely process. It was like a wild spasm in every muscle of the body. But it is a very fair price for the power given. When Jin managed to fail, Saren said, "How could you defeat the monster? The Academy said you had no skills." "Yes, it is. I have absolutely no skills. It's probably just an adrenaline rush." "And the lessons at the Academy," replied Jin. "A unique immersion skill. It can even be used on secondary characters. This means that Jin can borrow the power of people who match his level. The only problem was that the payoff from these characters was too great. And then, Jin thought that the only way to reduce the blowback was to strengthen his body. In other words, our hero needed to exercise more. He realized that he wouldn't be able to use the dive in this state. He needed to increase his stamina first. The first thing Jin did when he got home was to get some rest. The battle with the wolves had tired him out. How suddenly he got a text message was a rarity. After all, Genie hadn't been in contact with anyone in the last couple of years. When he picked up his cell phone, he saw that it was a text message from Saren. She apologized to him. But Jin didn't understand what she was apologizing for. Opened the call log. He saw that he had 32 missed calls. Well, if someone was so insistent on calling him, it must have been extremely important. All of these calls were from Saren. It's all about the girl telling reporters what happened in that supermarket. She didn't want to tell anyone because she knew Jin didn't like the attention, but she had to do it because the academy principal made her do it. Jin didn't expect this news to be so hyped up. The reason is because the monsters first appeared in a non-dungeon. That's why this news caused such a stir. Over the past few days, Jin's life has rapidly begun to change. If before he could only dream of adventurers, now he is one himself. But even though the news about the genie only broke a few hours ago, there have already been plenty of haters. Among tons of negative comments, there was one that melted our hero's heart. It was a comment from one of the people who saved our heroes. But that's not all. After such a big news, Jin began to write to old acquaintances. Some of them he had studied with at the academy, and some of them were still studying. But there were some unknown users who were insanely eager to meet our hero. Of all the messages, the message from his instructor was the one that caught our hero's attention the most. That idiot, Gina, humiliated him the whole time he was in school and treated him like garbage. And now that he was on the front lines of the news, Jean was becoming interested in him. Jin is a little taken aback by this flood of popularity, but there's no point in blaming Saren for it. After all, she meant well. After a little rest, the Genin felt much better, and most importantly, he figured out how to use the skill. With the recent events, it was clear to the genie that there was no way to delay any longer. When the towers first appeared, most adventurers rushed to conquer them, hoping for easy success. But unfortunately, few were able to get out of yours alive. And those who could gained rare skills. But most importantly, in addition to skills, they gained power and worldwide popularity. Now yours has grown to an impossible level, but adventurers of various levels are still trying to conquer them. Some say that you only have to get into a dungeon once to have a good life. It's rather strange that no one has entered the Swordmaster's Tower yet. Not even the high-ranking adventurers. This tower, one of the ones Jin described in his novels. To enter it would be the ultimate suicide. But Jin couldn't look at it once, because it was a figment of his imagination. For curiosity's sake, Jin even decided to get closer to her, to get a better look at her. But going to her, our hero is content to be very tired, which once again proves that he should increase his stamina. When Jin touched the pedestal that stood at the entrance to the tower, he felt the energy of the 7 heroes. Seeing words and phrases that he could only imagine in his head before was quite unfamiliar to the genie. Everything around him, to the genie, was both so new and so familiar at the same time. When suddenly, the stranger shouted, "Hey, it's obvious that this is your first time near the tower. It's dangerous to touch anything here." And he's right. You can get into the tower by simply touching an object from there. Therefore, adventurers usually careful altogether, which is not far from the tower. But ordinary people have nothing to fear. Even if they touch something in the tower, they won't be transported there. Only adventurers. In other words, Jin is half human, half adventurer, and he can only get into the tower by activating his unique skill. When suddenly, the writing on the rock began to glow, and the genie was notified that he had been named the true owner of the 7 towers. But what is most interesting, our hero received an invitation from the owner of this tower. Before he could blink, Jin was inside this tower, but everything around him seemed quite friendly. And meanwhile, on the top floor of this tower, its master was watching our hero. Funny enough, the owner of this tower looked exactly like our hero, with only slight differences in the color of his hair and the scars on his face. The tower master sensed there was something strange about the genie. He had no sense of mana in him at all, and in order to find out exactly what he felt, the tower master decided to invite him in. The place our hero has entered is called Predator Territory. This is a kind of test level, and the monsters here appear depending on the strength of the adventurer. The news that Jin had fallen into the tower quickly spread around the world, for it was the first time in history that a man without any strength had fallen into the tower. Interestingly, Jin used to make superhuman efforts to get this opportunity. Well, back at the academy, he was nicknamed the Defective Adventurer. He got that paltry label because he came in last place on the practical exam. Even after awakening a unique skill, there's not a single chance that he would be able to handle conquering the tower right away. When suddenly, the genie got a message from the tower keeper. Standing there like a scarecrow, mouth open, so funny. Jin immediately realized who had invited him here. It was funny that the owner of this tower even lowered the difficulty so that Jin would come to him. As suddenly the genie exclaimed in surprise, "Wait, can you really change the complexity of the tower?" "Of course I can, it's my tower," replied the tower master. Remembering his short stories, Jin said, "You say you are the tower master, your name must be Eden." "Wow, do you know me?" the tower master replied. Of course Jin knew him, because he had created him. But you have to be careful anyway. After all, Eden in real life might be different from what Jin made up. It's only been a couple days and I'm already so famous. God, it's going to be exhausting if I get too popular, Eden wrote. After seeing this message, Jin had not the slightest doubt that Eden was the owner of this tower. Eden is the main character in the 7 heroes. The prototype for him was Jin himself. only the best version of him. A guy who can hold a sword but doesn't have the talent of a mana. But with the help of a teacher, he awakens it. Then he finds companions and goes to the demon castle. And after defeating them, Eden becomes a legendary hero that everyone respects. Generally speaking, Eden became what Jin wanted to be. That's why he's his favorite character. Who would have thought you'd get to talk to the protagonist of your own book? I wonder why Eden invited the genie into his tower. Well, it's worth meeting him anyway, especially since you can't just leave the tower. After the conversation ended, a timer appeared that counted down, when suddenly a huge dragon flew over Jin's head. Luckily, he didn't see it. Remembering the plot in his book, our hero realized that this timer showed the time until the appearance of the monster-class disaster. If nothing was done, Jin would definitely die. To begin with, he decided to look around to see which part of the tower he was in. All around, there was wet soil and grassy onions. But this information, too little to know where exactly he was. In his novel, there were at least 10 locations with similar environments. While wandering around, Jin came across an area where dozens of wooden ball fragments were lying around. After examining the swords, Jin was very surprised. After all, these swords were not even suitable for training because of the strange shape of the blade. When suddenly, on one of the wrecks, our hero noticed an inscription. Eden. Settings. All information one time. Jin realized he was in the first chapter of his novel. Located at Eden's training camp is the place in which a talentless boy awakened his talent, or else become a great hero. The opening part of the novel was epitomized in the tower. Apparently the genie will have to go through each chapter one by one to get to the end. Fortunately, our hero knew how to get past this part of the tower, for he wrote the story himself. But still doubted he could handle the ordeal, even with his preparation. In the end, Jin went from thinking to action. After all, the time until the disaster-class monster appeared was getting shorter by the second. Stabbing one of the wooden sword fragments into the ground, Jin felt that he had hit something interesting. From beneath the ground, our hero pulled out a long, woven coconut fiber. This is a very rare item, and belongs to the spiritual plants, even though it looked disgusting. But this miraculous plant could permanently increase magical power by 1 point. But the most amazing thing is how many of them there are here. Usually coconut fiber is very hard to find, and here there are more than 50 of them. But even if someone finds this plant, it certainly wouldn't occur to him to eat it. After all, in addition to the terrible appearance, it also smells bad, and tastes generally disgusting. Some of the heroes of his novel even vomited when the first time they tried this fiber. At this point, Jin was already regretting making this plant so unique and tasting so awful. His body was very much against taking it in his mouth. But it was exactly 45 minutes until the disaster-class monster appeared. In a situation like this, you can't hesitate. So you have to get over yourself and eat the plant, no matter how horrible it is. Jin ate these roots one after another without ceasing. After a while, he even stopped tasting the disgusting flavor. 15 minutes until the monster appeared. In all that time, Jin had over 30 coconut weaves. It felt like his guts had been twisted and shoved backwards. Because of this sudden rise in mana levels, Jin's body was becoming more and more unstable. It got to the point where his nose and mouth were bleeding. After eating a few more coconut weaves, Jin had reached his absolute limit. Having accumulated enough mana, he wanted to pour it into the sword, as Eden had done. Meanwhile, the master of the tower watched our hero with great amazement. After all, an ordinary man could not have known about this plant. And then it began to dawn on me that our hero had all the information about his tower. Before the monster appears, it's only minutes away. But Jin, no matter how hard he tries, can't concentrate the accumulated mana. And then he remembered something very interesting. She was a magician ruling a family in a small country. But one day she lost all her partners in a botched raid on a demon tower. And after that, she moved to the village, where I met the then young Edenam. At the time, he was just killing himself with training because he couldn't use mana properly. Seeing the little boy literally destroy himself, she felt sorry for him. So she decided to teach him mana control. Stabilization did not take long. Feeling joy, she decided to become a teacher in this village. It was she who was the first Eden teacher. It was for this reason that Jin decided to use the immersion skill to infuse his weapon with magical power. This time, the dive went as well as it could have, without any difficulties. Now the knowledge of Dare Masha is fully available to our hero. Seeing the aura that surrounded our hero, Eden cried out in surprise, "What the hell?" This energy, it's exactly like my teacher's. Who is this guy? Eden added. Having gained the knowledge of the sorceress, Jin began to slowly purify mana and channel it into the heart, and from the heart to the fingertips, and then into the sword. Even mages of high ranks are not always able to saturate items with magic. From this that it takes a huge amount of mana to do so. The mana flow was out of control, causing an anomaly in his heart. And then the rest of her body. For powerful adventurers, saturating objects with mana is an ordeal, not to mention the average person. Soon enough, Jin found himself on the brink of death. Eden, meanwhile, was watching everything that was going on with great curiosity. Jin knew full well it was a near suicide, and he was very afraid of dying. But instead of meekly awaiting my fate, he decided to do his best, betting on trying to squeeze out all his strength. If he does nothing, he'll die. But this way there is at least the slightest chance of victory, and that he will come out of this tower alive. By putting all his mana into the sword, Jin discovered a hidden quest. It's called giving life to his sword, thereby clearing the first floor. But unfortunately, the mana loss was too much, and in the end, Jin died. But in this case, death is not the end, only the beginning. The swordsman of the horizon has given the genie life, so that he can continue his journey. Meanwhile, correspondents and groups of adventurers gathered near the no longer swordsman dissecting the filth. It's been over 2 weeks since this tower appeared, but still, no adventurer has been able to enter it. Such news was quite alarming to the common people. After all, if there was no hero to clear the tower, new dungeons would appear every year. Of course, 2 weeks isn't a long time, and there have been towers where no one has entered for months. I mean, you usually try to find the myth that the tower is associated with first, when suddenly in the middle of a report, a message appeared at the entrance to the tower, that the first level had been cleared, and the passageway to the Swordmaster's tower was blocked. It was a big mystery to everyone around him who was the hero who was able to clear the first floor of the tower. Many even began to speculate that there was some ambitious newcomer, in no way inferior to the rankers. Journalists were eager to interview this adventurer. After all, such news always causes a huge stir. And for journalists, it's a treasure trove. They are willing to do anything for a big scoop. But coming to the main entrance, the journalist did not see anyone. As suddenly, she felt that she stepped on something soft. When she looked down, she saw that she'd stepped on a guy, who was sleeping soundly, thinking he was a regular person. She turned around and just walked away, on a hero's quest. While Jin slept, it was already evening. When he opened his eyes, he saw that he was outside the tower, which means his plan worked perfectly, and he cleaned out the dungeon with the survivors. Suddenly, Jin heard a voice in his head saying, "You're finally awake. While you were sleeping, everyone had already left." There was no doubt that the Aiden was talking to him. And then, Jin cried out in horror, "Impossible! Can you talk outside the tower?" It's a little more complicated than it looks. Eden can actually talk outside the tower and inside the tower. But he can only do that with our hero! Jin was surprised to hear that. I thought Eden was fully synchronized with the tower. But apparently the connection between Genie and Eden came about because of our hero's unique status. After all, he is the creator of these towers. As suddenly this one shouted, "The show you put on inside was very interesting. I never seem to get bored around you," Eden added. "Well, it was nice to meet you. I'll see you around. It's getting late and I have to go home," said Gene. When he heard that, he laughed like a madman and said, "You're funny. You got me all wrong. I'm gonna follow you around like a ghost, so do your best." Eden's character is too stubborn. Therefore, it is impossible to dissuade him from this idea. Now our hero's life will become a little hectic. After Gina got home and slept, all the events in the tower began to seem like a dream. That would be believable if it weren't for one thing. Jin's entire body was overflowing with a huge amount of mana. Compared to its previous performance, the mana rate has increased sixfold. Could it be that it was only because of the magic plants that he was able to increase his stats so much? But that's not the best part. Jin also gained access to as many as 7 new skills, and was given the title Resurrected. Before Jin could get excited about his new acquisition, Eden entered the conversation and said, "What are you excited about? It's a basic skill. Listen to me. Give me a warning when you talk. You know, any damsel in distress if the heir suddenly starts talking to him," replied Jean. When suddenly, with a heavy sigh, Eden said, "By the way, I didn't just give you these skills. Check out the characteristics window as well. I think you'll be pleasantly surprised." But Jin, he just checked his vitals, and other than the Rastamana, he didn't notice any changes. But still, I decided to listen to Edon and open it again. And this time, the change was indeed shocking aside, Jin was even speechless for a moment. It's all about Eden giving the genie Manu a hero. This is a passive, exclusive skill. Thanks to this characteristic, all mana manipulations will have a positive effect, and the mana limit in his body has been removed. In other words, Jin now has unlimited mana, which could easily be considered cheating. Upon learning of his new abilities, the genie had an ingenious plan in mind. Suddenly he cried out, "Great! It's my time!" The next morning, Jin came to the first testing center. Here, he wants to test the peak of his abilities, as suddenly, the hero's passive mana skill kicked in. Warns Jin about the use of mana in his direction. Feeling threatened, his body seemed to automatically dodge the threat. Jin turned around and saw that someone had gotten the idea to throw a soda bottle at him using mana. When suddenly the stranger said, "Hey asshole, long time no see, where have you been hiding all this time?" This guy used to be Jin's classmate. He has a rare skill, and his name is Han. During his training, Han used to beat Jin up a lot, even outside the training ground. A lot of people who thought Han hated Jin because he got first place in the entrance exam, but the true reason for his hatred of our hero is not fully understood. Leaning over to the Jin, Han whispered in a frantic voice, "Let's go back to the old days. I'll beat you once, and you'll run away, okay? It's weird. It's been over 2 years and Han still hates our hero. It's like his anger has gotten worse." When suddenly, at the other end of the hallway, someone said, "Is that a fight? Hey, look at them academy uniforms. Kids these days are so wild." Beating up a man in front of witnesses was too risky, because Khan might get kicked out of the academy. So he let Jin go this time. But before he left, he promised they'd revisit the conversation. Gina, just revealing he wanted to punish his abuser right here and now, but need to hold back and focus on the evaluation. After this situation, Idan called Genie a brat and a loser, because he didn't answer the Khan. With a fake smile on his face, Jin replied, "Don't worry about it. I don't care about people like him." Of course it was a lie. But Jin didn't come here to confront me. He came here to find out his level of magical ability. Before you start testing your ability, you'll need to register first. After a little registration, you need to select the difficulty level of the test to be tested. Jin chose the lowest difficulty level. In fact, the choice of difficulty is not that important. After all, the monsters will still be selected based on the object data. After the system analyzed the genie and selected a caveman Golbot as his opponent, he had to choose a weapon. To fully experience the difference in strength, the conditions must be the same as they were when you were studying. Therefore, without the slightest hesitation, Jin chose the sword. Feeling the blade of his hand, Jin's swordsmanship was activated, which turned his body into a killing machine. The body feels light, like Jin's using a dive. Well, it's time to see how much he's changed. In seconds, and with one swing of his sword, Jin cut the monster in half. He had never dreamed of such power before. Jin killed the monster in just 3 seconds, breaking the previous record by a full 29 seconds. Since the first monster was too easy for our hero, the system automatically increased its difficulty. The system has decided that the genie's equal opponent is Zeus's lightning dog, a very formidable and dangerous opponent. Meanwhile, a crowd had gathered in the lobby, watching vigilantly through the screen. Among the audience, there was even a Palm Chun, the zero-generation adventurer, who had single-handedly cleared the Thunder God's tower and got everyone's skills. Han, all his life, had dreamed of becoming the apprentice of a legendary adventurer like Chun. Han approached him and said, "Dear sir, I would like to become your disciple. Could you watch the video of my fights?" To which Chun replied, "No need. I've already found an interesting guy to be my apprentice." Han suspected that it wouldn't work the first time, but he nevertheless wondered who was able to attract Mr. Chun's attention. Han looked at the screen and almost fainted in surprise. His dream teacher wanted to take Jin as a student. Walks over to the control panel. Chung turns on the microphone and says, "Hey, can you hear me? Good job." Jin didn't expect someone to be watching his battle, so when he heard the voice, he started waving his head in confusion. I think it's worth telling you a little bit more about where Jin is now. It's a virtual room that can manipulate a person's 5 senses. It is even possible to feel life-threatening here. Because of this, most test takers feel overwhelming fear. What's to cover, even Chun, when he got into this room, was for the first time more than a little scared. But Jin had absolutely no fear whatsoever, even looking the Zeus dog straight in the eyes. People don't feel fear in only 2 cases: if they're brave or stupid. Whatever the rest of the world thinks Jin is. Jun wanted to look at him with his own eyes. To do so, he asked Jin to get close to the monster and find a vulnerable spot. But the genie did not have to do that, for the monster himself approached him. In the heat of battle, looking for a monster's weaknesses is quite difficult, especially when it's trying to rip your throat out. Well, frankly, it's amazing that Jin can single-handedly fight off a monster of this caliber. Wounding the lightning dog, Jin noticed a small growth on its neck. It seems like it's not that hard to find the weaknesses of monsters with a high level of strength. You could say the genie's victory is in his pocket. The monster's weakness has been discovered. Now you have to hit it with all your might. But this monster, in addition to its great strength, also has a high speed. But thanks to the hero's mana that the genie was given by Eden, his speed score is many times higher than the monster. With one powerful and graceful blow, Jin took the lightning bolt to the dog's life. The total time of the hunt was 4 minutes and 50 seconds. After seeing our hero fight a monster of such rank, Chun decided without the slightest doubt that Jin would become his apprentice. But Han, on the other hand, was truly terrified. He shouted in a trembling voice, "It can't be the same Jin, can it?" Chung, hearing these words, turned to the Khan and said, "Listen, what's your name? It doesn't matter. You know this guy." Meanwhile, Jin had already left the training room exhausted. Suddenly Eden said, "God, don't tell me you're tired. Not bad for such a weakling, though." I don't know if Eden is praising our hero or insulting him, but that's not the most important thing right now. Looks like the 2-year pause has weakened him after all. I'll have to practice a lot to use the dive, more freely. Maybe someday he'll be able to use that skill on Eden, just as long as he doesn't pass on his nasty temper. When all of a sudden, near the exit, Chun walks up to the genie and says, "Hey man, I was talking to you. Nice job. You used the Academy's ball technique. You're a student?" Jin was exhausted and couldn't understand a single word. The only thing he could mutter was, "Excuse me? Who are you?" And then Han Yi intervened in the conversation and said, "Sir, this is a former student of the Academy named Jin." Embarrassed, our hero said, "I went to the Academy, but I had to take a break. The thing is that the instructors didn't teach me anything." When Chun heard that, he looked menacingly at Jin and smiled and said, "You're brave, saying that to my face. But I have to agree with you. There were some professors who only hurt the students. So you learn from me and you can reach heights that others can't even dream of." "What do you think?" Chun added. Mr. Chun was good at literally everything related to fighting. Swordsmanship, hand-to-hand combat, and even spear techniques. Jin was so surprised at this suggestion that involuntarily, a few impermissible words escaped his mouth. Chun was a rare specimen even amongst the ranchers, as few people master all fighting styles perfectly. Jin was delighted that such a man himself offered to be his teacher, but still he refused, because he thought that such a teacher for him too expensive. It would seem that Jin's refusal should have angered Chun, but no, it added even more excitement. And then he said, "I take it you don't believe me? Then I'll make you believe. We'll have a test. I'll tell you what suits you best," added Chun. It's incredible. He demonstrates one of his 7 unique skills, namely the Adventurer's Eye. This skill is based on purity and mana fluctuations. It reads information about its owner, down to food preferences, thanks to, hero mana. Gene sensed that someone was trying to count him. If Jones can do that, he'll have access to the author of the story, which could turn out to be a real disaster. As expected, he was able to enter our hero's mind without any problems, but he didn't find anything supernatural. Jin was just a regular guy with a modicum of magic. This is the first time what will be seen as a man with ordinary magic, but at the same time insanely powerful, which makes him even more interesting. But he wasn't going to stop there. Chung wanted to find out what the secret was at any cost, when suddenly something happened that the adventurer could never have predicted. The adventurer's eye worked on him. The thing is, the hero's mana allowed Chun to get into Jin's mind, where the Zero Adventurer is most vulnerable, and fended off his own attack on him. This way, before long, Jin will have all the information about Chun. It's a kind of immersion, only without the ability. When the Mana Hero was activated, Jin learned that the man's name was Pom Chun, better known as the father of all adventurers, and his magic level is on a whole other level. Even with Eden's enhancement, Jin still has a long way to go to reach that level of skill. When the adventurer's eye deactivated, Jin went back to normal. Opening his eyes, he saw Chun in front of him, who said, "Jin, and you are a jolly small. You will be my apprentice." For our hero, it is an incredibly great honor to learn from the father of adventurers himself. Seeing his dream snatched from under his nose, Han was torn with anger. As we already know, Han hated Jin because he was the best in the theory exam. Even though he had a small build, Jin still got more attention. So that's what this is all about. It's simple human envy. Jeep spent the next day sitting at his computer. That may seem reckless, considering what he's going through. But the thing is, Chun himself had told Jin to rest while he prepared their training. He promised the genie the toughest, most grueling workout possible. Play, video games, Genie was getting bored. So he just decided to watch the news. Just then, there was a report about his former academy. The whole thing is that the head of the Adventurers Association came to the academy and fired half of all the teachers. And every single one of those fired teachers was Jin's teacher. When suddenly, out of nowhere, a huge information window appears in front of the genie. It said that the author of the story had discovered a fragment of the original story by opening this notification. The system took Jin to some forum. There was a discussion about an alchemist contest, the reward, which contained a piece of strange stone. Seeing this, Edan urgently contacted the genie, when all of a sudden he screamed like a madman, "Hey, idiot! You have to enter this contest and win. You understand me. It's not just a rock, it's a bastium. Now it's clear. Bastium is an extremely rare ore from the Age of Destruction. It simply doesn't exist in the real world. It's an ore Jin invented himself. In the novel, the bastium was described as an ancient fragment, proof of God's existence. Even the imperial family appreciated it and bought it every year. But only 30 kilograms were harvested. Despite its unremarkable appearance, it is a very valuable and rare material, because it was an alchemist competition. Eden asked Jin if he knew how to create. To which he replied, "How would I know? Since bastium is extremely valuable." Eden decided to teach the genie the skill of potion brewing, and since the competition would begin in exactly 1 week, Eden decided to start training immediately. Medicine, which are called potions. These are items that can rid a person of negative conditions. They're easy to carry around and the effects are good, but learning potions takes years. But you bet, it's very difficult, and it requires a tremendous amount of knowledge. If Nash could easily create even a low-level potion, any guild would want to recruit him. Not to forget the immersion skills. Borrowing the knowledge and skills of a junior apprentice imperial alchemist, Jin had no trouble creating his first potion. Of course, this potion wasn't some kind of supernatural potion, but it took a lot of effort to make it. That day, Jin had planned to use the low-level alchemist dive for only 2 hours, but he had overlooked the fact that Adan was a workaholic. Despite the fact that this contest was originally a completely mediocre one, and its reward was of no value to ordinary adventurers. But still, a lot of high-level alchemists decided to take part in these competitions. The most famous and powerful of all was the adventurer known as Master Reynolds' son. Fortunately, the contest is not open to masters, so there's still a chance of winning. Jin thought that no one would be interested in the unknown stone, but he forgot about the artisans. There is a group of adventurers who collect various materials in towers and dungeons. Afterwards, they bring them to artisans who make them into all sorts of cool things. Only 38 people have ever earned the title of artisan, and among them, there are 8 of the best. They're called craftsmen. The wizards themselves may not be in the competition, but their children are also quite skilled potion brewers. Jeans stayed up several nights studying the literature and preparing for this competition. So before the start, he decided to drink his potion, when suddenly a stranger came up to the genie and said, "I haven't seen you here before. What's that potion you're drinking?" Jin was a little confused by this unexpected encounter. He replied in a worried voice, "It's just an ordinary fatigue potion." Suddenly, the friendly smile on the stranger's face changed to an arrogant one, and he said, "I was told that masters were banned from participating, but I was not told that even stray dogs could enter the contest." Jin, once again convinced that most of the strongest adventurers are the most common idiots, when suddenly, the host announced the start of the contest and invited group number 2 to come to the office. He may be a strong adventurer, but he's known as Master Reynolds' son, which shows he's incomplete. Jin was tired of everyone looking down on him, so he said, "Eden, I must win at all costs." "Kill that arrogant dog," Eden replied. During the first stage of the contest, the contestants had to prepare one of the basic potions. They were given 1 hour to prepare it, despite the fact that this contest was positioned for beginners. All the ingredients here were top class! As suddenly, Ronald Jr. noticed a guy standing at the end of the table, not moving. Looking over, he saw it was the same guy he'd talked to before the contest. Due to his arrogant character, The adventurer couldn't keep his mouth shut and shouted, "Hey, you're practicing your fantasy in the middle of a competition? You don't know that we need to get the ingredients quickly." But Jin simply ignored his words, as if he had indeed fallen asleep. Meanwhile, at Mr. Chung's mansion, he's been busy preparing for his hands-on training with the genie, even hiring master craftsmen to do it. For training, he bought a magic circle of gravity control and a magic circle of mana concentration. You don't get that many laps in a regular gym. And Jin's not exactly a regular student. Craftswoman wondered who Chun took as his apprentice, that he was trying so hard. When suddenly he said, at first glance, he's an ordinary student who dropped out of the academy. However, he is the only one who was able to block my unique adventurer's eye skill. It means that his skill is at least equal to, if not superior to, mine, Chun added. To be honest, Jin was a little intimidated by Chun. Just as suddenly he decided to guffaw and said, "Actually, I just want to take care of the student. It's not just that the father of all adventurers calls me that." Leaving the masters on the unit, Chun went to an important business meeting. Meanwhile, Jin was in the midst of preparing to prepare a potion for this. He used the skill of immersion and borrowed the knowledge of Aryan Pepper. This girl was a disciple of the great alchemist from the original. Arya Pepper wasn't the best alchemist, however. She had no equal in controlling mana. She was a realist, and I competed with all my shortcomings, so I read 100 books a day to compensate for them. Eventually, she was made a direct apprentice to the great alchemist. During her apprenticeship, she gained so-called ancestral knowledge. Saturate the elixir with Arya Pepper's mana. Jean put all her knowledge into this vial. By drinking this potion, Jin was able to get the missing information, but unfortunately, the system deemed the knowledge too deep for Jin to recognize, due to low mana reserves. And at that moment, the hero's mana skill activated, which fully replenished the lack of mana. But the lack of mana isn't the only problem between Genie and Arya, yet a huge difference in strength. The hero's mana also makes up for this difference, but the feeling is just awful. The pressure increased so much that it felt like my eyes were about to burst. Well, when the difference in strength became insignificant, Jin felt a mad rush of energy. He temporarily gained mastery of alchemy, and the knowledge and experience of alchemy increases. Eden immediately noticed that the energy emitted by the genie was different from what it had been during their training. Finally, the dive was over. If it wasn't for the knowledge Jin had gained from training with Eden, it wouldn't have worked. Now that all the preparations were done, it was time to grab the ingredient. But all the shelves were already empty. The rest of the participants had taken almost all the herbs. The only thing left is poison ivy, a few other flowers that are life-threatening. As a friend, Eden said, "So, that's great. Let's make some poison. We'll get a couple more if it's a powerful poison that can take down a whole crowd of monster." So Jean has astandilopia, which raises his body temperature when eaten. If you eat too many of these berries, they melt the veins. There's also a small barrion bush. Becomes a mucilaginous film when heated. Used for external application. Poisonous when consumed internally. All in all, with the knowledge gained, Jin would be able to concoct a decent level of poison with just those two ingredients. The most important thing is for the ingredients to have a strong effect. But positive or negative, it doesn't matter. If the genie can get these berries right, it should work. All the previous products were nothing compared to this one. Even experienced alchemists, let alone novices, didn't dare to prepare it. Carefully, drop by drop, Jin was piecing these greens together. If this works, one sip could kill 1,000 people. The head judge at this competition was the master of Potion Jam, Reynolds. That idiot's daddy. He carefully observed all the participants. At one point he was disappointed, because everyone was preparing the most basic healing potions. At this stage his son was beyond competition. Experience and genetics did the trick, when suddenly his attention was drawn to one of the contestants, who, unlike the others, was not using a specialized device. At first, Reynolds Sr. thought he was a fool. After all, the contest time is very limited. Watching the genie, he saw something that shocked him. Meanwhile, Jin was trying to separate the poison from the berries and transfer it all to the purified water. And it was all thanks to Mamna. To remove the poison manually, only masters are capable of doing so, and that's only in theory. And thanks to this method, the effect of the plants is amplified several times. But if Jin makes a mistake, the power of the poison will be multiplied, and the effects will spread not only here but several kilometers. For that very reason, poison is never removed manually. After all, only a true madman would do such a thing. "Understand all the risk," Reynolds shouted. "Manager, urgently stop the competition and get everyone out." Suddenly, there was a loud cheer and applause in the stands, and the audience was simply delighted. And the reason is that one of the contestants managed to make a unique class potion and gain 1,000 points. And of course, that participant was our gem. Fortunately, the poison separation went well. He couldn't believe his eyes. Even he could hardly do it again. What's to say about Reynolds Jr., who almost fainted from surprise? And it was the flame potion that brought the genie victory. The ingredients for this potion are completely poisonous plants. But by separating the poison, Jin obtained a potion that temporarily increases mana and resistance to fire. Thanks to this competition, Jin was able to increase his base mana level and his alchemy level. Plus, with Pepper's knowledge, he could make this potion quickly enough. The jury unanimously declared the Jin the winner of this contest. After all, his potion was flawless. But Reynolds Jr. disagreed. He thought our hero was a crook and somehow managed to bring the potion here. No wonder it's hard for a man like that to admit defeat. Suddenly his father intervened and said, "Hey, what are you doing? Why are you embarrassing yourself and embarrassing me? Have you lost your fear?" Father added. Junior tried his best to convince his father, "You're a goddamn fraud." And then his father's patience ran out and he shouted, "You mean I can't tell the difference between a cheater and a good alchemist?" "Dad, no, that's not it." "Okay, I'm sorry, I was wrong," Junior answered. Reynolds Sr. was much more polite, his son, so ordered him to make him apologize to the genie. Whatever the younger man was, he wouldn't cross his father, and he apologized to Jean. Suddenly, Reynolds said, "I've been watching the competition very closely. Your mana control is excellent. May I ask who taught you that?" Those words embarrassed Jean a little bit, and he blushed a little bit. And he said, "The thing is, I'm self-taught." Found out that Jean had taught himself everything. Both Reynolds were astonished and speechless. The two Reynolds were astonished and speechless, because usually self-taught people can't even tell the difference between an ordinary weed and a medicinal herb, when suddenly, the announcer comes running up to them and asks Jean to go on stage for the awards. Jin apologized to the master and his son and left. As he left, he watched the father reprimand his son for his terrible behavior. Looking at Jin, Reynolds thought, who would have thought that in such a small country there would be such a great talent? A very promising guy, when he saw how hard his son was. The master said, "Son, you have done well. I am proud of you." "Yes, Dad. I'll study even better when we get home. I won't disappoint you," replied Junior. A couple minutes later, the awards ceremony began, at which the winners will receive their prizes. Suddenly, the host said, "Welcome our winner, a dark horse named Jin. He will be awarded by none other than the father of all adventurers, the esteemed Mr. Chin." Chin handed Jin a goblet, leaned over to him and said, "Hey kid, where'd you come from?" After the awards ceremony, Jun and Jin decided to talk privately at the rooftop cafe. The adventurer was madly surprised that his new apprentice could barely brew, but he couldn't figure out why the genie wanted the stone. Like everyone else, Chun wondered where Jin had learned to master potion brewing, to which Jin replied, "I am self-taught, and I need this stone for research." Our hero never ceases to amaze his new teacher, opening up to him more and more every day. As suddenly Chung said, "You're a very interesting guy. If it's no secret, what's special about this stone?" Being as excited as possible, Jin shouted, "Master, you'll be surprised. It looks like an ordinary stone, but it's actually a very valuable ore. I don't mean to be impertinent, but could it be possible that you know a man rank above the ordinary artisan?" Jin added. Chung smiled and said, "There's no way a blacksmith can make something useful out of this stone." But then Jin interrupted him and added, "I told you, it's not just a stone. You can look at it with an adventurer's eye." Jun thought Jin was crazy, but he decided to check anyway. Upon activation, the adventurer's eye discovered hidden ore data. But to reveal this information, more mana was needed. So Chun activated the adventurer's eye to its full potential, which is how he knew it was a unique ore. That hides its owner. Strange, because even the organizers said it was just an unknown stone. Chun was anxious to find out how Jin knew about it, but he decided not to. After all, he just wants to be a mentor. He was well aware that sooner or later he would have to retire. And in Genie, he saw an heir who could carry on his business. Deactivating the adventurer's eye, Chun handed Jin the stone and said, "You asked if I knew artisans. Bear with me for a month. I will give this ore to a good acquaintance of mine who will do something with it. By the way, I told you to rest and you went after that thing. Why didn't you just go out with your friends?" Chun added. It had been years since Jin had seen his friends. The last time he went out with his friends was back when he was still in the academy. It had been over 2 years since then. Our hero decided to call his friend to go for a walk with him before he started training with Chun. And just as Jin called his friend, a guy nearby's phone rang. He turned around and saw his friend standing right behind him. It was amazing that it had been so long since they'd seen each other. Just when Jin wanted to call him, he was right there. This guy's name is Kang. As a freshman, he took the top position among all the students. Now he's ranked first or second in the whole academy. Since his enrollment, he has shown remarkable ability in all disciplines. A guy with many talents, the swordsmanship stands out the most among them. To be honest, his skills are at the A-rank dungeon level. When all of a sudden Kant said, "Jean, do you know what started in the group chat room when I said I was having lunch with you?" All the girls went crazy. "Oh yeah, remember Yoon? She'll be here soon," Kang added. Jin, Kang, and Yuna, the famous trinity of friends for the whole academy. During their studies, Yuna has helped Jin many times to cope with problems in the academy. Over time, the genie's feelings grew into more than just friendship. But he was afraid to tell the girl. And then, he left the academy altogether. Seeing Jin's confused face, Kang said, "You know how hard it was for her when you stopped contacting her. When you meet her, be sure to tell me where you've been. Oh, by the way, she'll be here soon," Kang added. Suddenly, Jin felt something strange. It was the exact same feeling he'd felt back then at the supermarket when the demon follower had shown up. It didn't take a second for the system to give the genie a mission. Someone nearby was possessed by a demon named Everton. Our hero had to break the curse and free the man. Thanks to the perfect mana control he inherited from Arya, Jin quickly located the possessed man by the distorted mana traces. Holy shit, that distorted mana was Yuna's. I'll tell you a little bit about when Jin was still at the academy. Yuna and Kang were known throughout the academy for their abilities. On top of that, Yuna was the eldest daughter of the Heavenly Palace's guild leader. One day, when other students were mocking the genie for not having any skills, Yuna stood up for him, and from that moment on, they became friends. But after that, the genie was bullied, but that loser was hanging out with the best students. Literally, every student who was stronger than Jin felt it was their duty to beat him up, but Yuna and Kang found a way out of it. Fighting in classrooms is forbidden, but they used sparring and practically lessons to stop his abusers, so Jin was always grateful to them and felt some guilt. Meanwhile, the famous Trinity had gathered together again. Kang and Jin stared at the young woman without taking their eyes off her. Then the girl asked what was going on. With a sad look, Kang said, "Yuna, you don't look good. You looked much better last time." When she heard that, she was embarrassed and said it was fine. The doctor had already prescribed the medicine. Knowing the true cause of the young woman's ill health, Jin began to ask her about her recent travels to strange places. The girl said that the academy had recently been preparing a tour of the dungeons, and asked her to check it out. It was the most common test, so the group consisted of a couple students, one professor. Even though it was a new dungeon, it was no different from hundreds of others, except for a small altar right in the center. Out of curiosity, the girl moved closer to it to check what was on that altar. It was almost 100% certain that it was regular blood, but it was still worth testing. When the girl touched the blood, it was as if everything around her was sucked underground, and the whole dungeon was filled with a dark aura. Startled, the girl pulled her hand away from the altar and everything stopped. At the time, she thought it was just a simple illusion. The only thing that confused her was that the blood was gone. Even now, the girl thinks it was just a simple trap. There are many dungeons with illusions. When suddenly, the genie jumped into the conversation and said, "Swing away like a simple trap." "I doubt it was a trap. Your mana is in complete chaos." "I'll take a look. It'll be fine. Just sit tight," Jin added. Seeing how worried her friends were about her, Yuna got excited and said, "I'm fine. I don't want to make you nervous after a long separation. Everton, it's not really a demon. It's an organization of demon worshippers, so they can borrow the power of demons to curse people. In such a case, there is one way to cure such a curse. In Jin's novel, only divine fire could break Everton's curse. For this, Jin used immersion to borrow the skill of a junior priestess, Esther, who just happens to possess divine energy. Fortunately, it hasn't been that long since the curse was placed, so it hadn't had time to build up and spread yet. Directing a stream of divine energy into Yuna, Jin asked the girl not to resist and try to keep her breathing steady. After a couple minutes, the energy that distorted Manu Young completely disappeared. Kang and Yuna were just thrilled with what Jin had just done. After all, they remembered him as just a smart guy who didn't have skills. With their questions, didn't embarrass Jin too much. A little calmer, he said, "I've had so many people help me so many times, it's a pity I can only do this for you." In fact, our hero is greatly downplaying his contribution, seeing as he just healed the curse with divine fire. And that's an extremely rare gift, as Jin suddenly said. But the thing is, the skill is different every time, depending on whose body it's immersed in. Without listening to him to the end, Kang grabbed Jin by the shoulders and shouted, "Whatever! You've waited so long for this, after all, congratulations." And Yuna was so happy for her friend that she even cried. She thought Jin deserved it. Now that Jin had gotten the skill, Kang thought that he would go back to the academy and continue his studies with them. And then Jin said, "But I'm going to leave her. I've got a master who's going to give me special training." Upon hearing this, his friends synchronously shouted, "What? Masters? Who is he?" But Jin has decided to keep his teacher's name a secret for now. After all, even if he said that Mr. Chun was his mentor, no one would believe him. Just as suddenly, Jin began to feel very sad and said in a trembling voice, "I'm sorry for not contacting you. You are my closest friends." After the cafe, the three of them took a long walk. So Jin didn't get home until 4 in the morning. Coming home, our hero received a notification that the mission was successfully completed, and now he has to get his reward. And the reward was secret information about Everton. After checking the reward, Jin learned that the Everton faction was going to take raid on a tour of the Academy's dungeons. In other words, Everton wants to attack the Academy, and it's 15 days before their raid begins. If nothing is done, Khan and Yuna could be in great danger. But you can't tell anyone about Everton's plans, because they might find out and then just change the timing of the attack. But to do, you still have to do something. It's his responsibility, because he created Everton. You can't let other people get hurt because of him, especially Yuna and Khan. At this point, Jin firmly decided that enough with just him getting help. It was time to pay the bills. The next day, Jin and Chun training started early in the morning. I have to admit, Chun's done a lot of work in the training room. In addition to the basic training equipment, Jin has a whole arsenal filled with various items. Chun came out of nowhere and said, "You stunned me with your yelling. What do you think of the new training room?" Jin was just thrilled. He didn't understand how such a modern training room could be built in the basement of a house. This training room was 100 times better than the academy, at least because of this generation's virtual combat system. I think it's worth explaining why this system is so cool. There's only one in Korea, and it costs a fortune. When suddenly Chun said, "Why are you so surprised? It's worth 50 billion won." "I'm a businessman who wants a return on his investment," Chung added. But before he started practicing, Chun decided to give the genie something. Removed the wrapping, Jin saw a small box that usually held jewelry, and that's what it turned out to be. The thing is, an artisan Chungnu made a necklace out of bastium. Because it was an unusual necklace, it had unique properties, such as enhancing, concentrating, and storing mana, plus changing its shape. Seeing how excited Jin was about his new necklace, Jun said, "All the blacksmiths were trying to find out where I got such a mineral. Don't even ask how much they wanted to buy it back." Gina, a strong laugh at those words. Suddenly he replied, "You can't sell something like that, it's too valuable." And he had already chosen me to be his master. Well, it's time to start studying. Master Chung teaches all the major academic disciplines. I wonder what he'll teach him in lesson 1. When suddenly, there was a loud bang, meaning that the front doors were locked. Immediately after locking the doors, the ventilation stopped working, and the floor began to emit a bright blue color. And then Chung said, "I've been thinking for a long time about what I can teach you. You already learned all the theory you can at the academy, and a true adventurer only needs experience, so the training room will be contaminated." Let the moment pass. The hero's mana began to fight the pollution around him. The 5th-generation organizational capsule developed is complete control over future consequences. In other words, Chun can put the genie in any conditions, both climatic and landscape, add different obstacles, and so on. The air around him felt heavy, so heavy that it was hard to breathe. It felt like Jin had fallen into a swamp. With such poor air quality, all of the Jin's performance decreased several times. Just as suddenly Chun said, "But what do you think of the dungeon air? It's all virtual, but it's hard to even stand, isn't it? In lesson 1, I'll teach you what I learned in combat. You need to get used to the contamination and overcome it." Jin had taken lessons like this during his time at the academy. But this time, it's more complicated. The air is so polluted that you can't even breathe it in. However, if you calm your heartbeat and start slowly inhaling and slowly exhaling this air, you can adapt to it. The main thing is to remain calm and not to increase the heart rate. With the first stage, Jin got through it pretty quickly. But this is just the beginning. Plus, the dungeons have a completely different ecosystem, which is maximized for monsters. The air in the dungeons didn't become that way on its own. If someone dies inside, their body melts, leaving behind only the smell of death. Because of this, air pollution builds up all the time, to the point where it can destroy the organs of anyone who enters it. Chun suddenly said, "So Jin, there's no point in hiding your unique skill. After all, it is your strength." Meanwhile, Jin had been in the contaminated environment for about an hour, and his body's vitals have dropped several dozen times. He's literally struggling to stay conscious. The tower has an automatic purification system, so our hero has never had to deal with anything like this before. But he quickly realized that he could not withstand such a thing with ordinary persistence. Fortunately, due to his long stay here, Jin's body was able to adapt, and the hero's mana skill began cleansing all of his internal organs. Continuous cleansing causes the hero's mono skill to improve. However, because of this, there was almost no strength left. And then Jin said, "Hey master." But Chun didn't listen to Jin and said, "It's hard, isn't it? 57 minutes is enough. You can come out now," Chun added. The adventurer was upset that he didn't see Jin's hidden skill, but he was still glad that he had done well in the first task. And then Jin said, "You didn't let me speak. I was going to ask, can I use a unique skill? I don't think I can last much longer without it." Upon hearing this, Chun became very angry and shouted, "What did you just say, fucking hell? Are you stupid? You sat there for an hour and didn't use it on purpose? I deliberately put you in this condition to awaken it, you fool." Jin immediately realized he was being stupid, and to lighten the mood, he said, "Master, you should have let me use my skills from the beginning." And then Eden comes on the line and says, "Funny you held up well, but you wouldn't have lasted a minute without me." Well, I had to admit that Aiden was completely right this time, because if it wasn't for the hero's mana skill, Jin would have died the moment he walked in here. I think it's time to talk a little bit about this skill. Demonic power can be defeated not only by divine power. There is a power that is only available to the 7 heroes. It's called hero mana. The most interesting thing is that Jin himself invented this skill when he was writing his novel. The genie can purify pollution through divine energy, but to do so, you must choose a character to borrow the power from. You need to find a character that has a low rank, but at the same time has high divine energy. But there's only one hero who fits those characteristics. As with the treatment of Yuna, the choice was the Priest of Esther. Fortunately, the dive went smoothly this time. But after diving, Jin noticed a peculiarity. Diving into low-level characters no longer traumatized his body. Perhaps he should try stronger characters. Anyway, Esther was strong enough to cleanse Jin's body and the environment of contamination. Watching the immersion dive, Chun thought that Jin's unique skill was spirit descent. It is a skill that summons and utilizes spirit power, but controlling it is impossible because the spirit-descending spirit has no personality of its own. As a rule, when a spirit descends, its possessor loses consciousness. So Jin was in perfect health. Suddenly, he shouted out, "Master, I'm done!" Something like this. This is the first time Chung has seen it. He had seen spirits possess adventurers many times, but he had never heard of one of them remaining conscious afterward. Chun was well aware that if Jin was capable of such a thing, then his potential lay far beyond the unique class. In the end, Jin was able to spend a full 3.5 hours in the polluted environment. Chun was not only surprised, he was truly delighted with the result. After all, he was looking for a disciple, but he found a monster. And at that moment, Chun wondered what the limit of Jin's strength was. So he said, "Stop pretending and get up. Or are you waiting for the applause?" Hearing this, Jeans indignantly jumped up and shouted, "Master! Yes, how can you say that? It was very hard, if anything." Funny, so Chun was right. Jin still had plenty of strength. And then, the master decided to organize a swordsmanship training session right now. Taking out a bamboo sword, Chun said with a smile on his face, "Because of you, I will have to stay late at work. We'll practice for as long as you take up my time. But first, I'll give you a good beating." When Jin saw the sword flying at his face, he shouted, "Master, you said to hold on until the end. Why are you hitting me?" It's been a full week of training at this pace, and it had to be said, they hadn't been very effective. Jin had already developed some muscles, and his performance had increased. Well, most importantly, during his training, he got information about the dungeons that the Academy is going to visit in a week. The tour will be in the dungeon next to the Tower of the Carrying Light. Lucky it's low level. Plus there'll be one security guard for every student. And the professors will be there too. Everyone seems to be too cautious and in favor of Everton. Also, Jin has really excelled in the past week in preparation for their raid. Thanks to Master Chun's training, not only his physical stats have improved, but also his mana utilization rate. Now low-level diving would have no side effect at all. Might even be able to apply at a medium level. Alchemy skills have also improved a bit. It was my Jin who started creating mid-level potions and auctioning them off. I have to admit, he's gotten pretty good at it. Jin bought high-level equipment with the money he made from selling his potions. Thanks to constant fencing lessons, Gina's ball skills have also grown significantly. In addition to the sword and equipment, Jin also bought an extraterrestrial bracelet. It can distort space and hold objects weighing up to 200 pounds. Despite his busy and demanding training schedule, Jin also had the weekend off to recuperate his body after training. One such weekend, the genie got a call from Master Chun. The principal of the academy asked him to escort the students on a tour of the dungeon. It would seem that such a person should have refused such an offer. But Chun hadn't been in the dungeon for a long time, so he agreed. But honestly, it's weird. There will be defenders and professors. Why would they need a master? They're going to a lower dungeon. After thinking for a while, Jin shouted, "Master, I want to go too. Please take me." "Why do you want to do that? It's boring and there's nothing to do there anyway," Chun replied. Jin expected that answer, so he said, "I dropped out of the academy because I trusted you, and now I can't enter the dungeon until I get my adventurer's license. And the least you can do in such a situation is..." Without even listening to the end, Chun shouted like a madman, "Snot, you've got a lot of nerve. Are you blaming me for everything?" "No, that's not it. Your apprentice needs to gain experience in real combat," said Jin. "If you think about it that way, it's quite reasonable, especially since Jin is now at a level where he can clear this dungeon by himself." After thinking it over, Chun agreed to take Jin with him, but on the condition that he stay close to him. Another week has come and gone. Tomorrow morning, Jin will go on a field trip with his friends. Everton, meanwhile, have already completed all their preparations for tomorrow. By no means should we think that meeting them will be easy. The most important thing to know about Everton is that they're crazy demon fanatics, willing to do anything for him. Early in the morning, Jin arrived at the meeting place of all the students before going on a field trip. But it looks like he came too soon. Suddenly, Saren ran up to him from behind and said, "Appa, hi, what are you doing here?" A little embarrassed, the guy replied, "Well, I'm going on a field trip. You're going there too, right?" Was the stupidest question anyone could ask. After all, of course, she would also be going on the tour as the best student at the academy. Now, in addition to Yuna and Kang, Jin will have to look after Siren. She could be in danger if something went wrong. A couple minutes later, Kan and Yuna came in. Jin told his friends he was going on a field trip too, but they thought he was joking. Suddenly, Saren said, "You're really going? I thought they didn't take truant students." Kang looked at the girl with surprise and said, "A truant? You don't know Jin dropped out of the academy and found himself a master." When the girl heard about it, she almost went crazy. Then she leaned over to the genie and whispered, "Oppa, who is he?" Before Jin could answer, the crowd of students started shouting enthusiastically. When Siren turned around, she saw Pom Chung. He was the reason why the students were shouting. Siren, Yuna, and Kang, as well as the rest of the students, were really excited to see the father of all adventurers. But Jin, on the other hand, was truly terrified. He had not yet told his friends that Mr. Chun was his mentor. Among friends, covering his face with his hands. Suddenly, Mr. Chun came up and said, "Hi, you should have said hello to me if you noticed. Don't tell me you decided to pretend you don't know your master." With a wild grin from ear to ear, Chun added. Realizing there was no turning back, Jin laughed awkwardly and said, "Guys, meet me. This is my foreman." And so the tour began. The environment here was quite filthy, but tolerable for regular students. This place had changed a lot since Yuna had been here. It used to be a very bright and cozy dungeon as far as it could be, and now the entrance to it is surrounded by a strange and gloomy forest. Even the level of this dungeon seems to have risen. Perhaps inviting Master Chun to accompany him wasn't such a bad idea. During the tour, Han watched Jin intently the whole time, trying to understand why the teacher he wanted to study with chose Jin over him, but we'll get to that later. Now our hero has received a game notification that the Scream Knight storyline has been activated. It would still be good to remember what that Night of the Scream was all about. Suddenly, a thick, black fog began to billow out of the forest. If you looked closely, you could see creatures with outlines very similar to humans. When Jean saw them, she remembered that the Scream Knight episode had harmless ghosts. Seeing Chun and the professors preparing to engage, Jin shouted, "Stop!" Master, please stop. This request greatly surprised Chun, but that wasn't Jin's most surprising request. Next, he asked them not to attack them at all, even though, at first glance, it seemed pretty obvious. They are in a dungeon, and all around them are evil spirits. However, if they were really evil spirits, they would have attacked immediately without a second thought. Plus, if you looked closely, there were smiles on their faces. After listening to Jin, Chung felt there was some common sense in it, and for some unknown reason, he decided to believe his disciple. Meanwhile, Jin had a new assignment. He needed to put souls to rest, against the clouds, or if they were attacked. They would become evil spirits that would haunt the offenders until they died. When suddenly, one of the guards shouted, "Hey, Chief, what are you doing? Do you want to hear this minnow?" Chun wouldn't have made that decision if he hadn't used the adventurer's eye himself, which revealed the truth. The plan is very simple. They will watch, and in case the ghosts attack first, only then will they engage. Everyone was shocked by the plan but accepted it. All except Khan. Overwhelmed with emotion, he shouted, "What are you talking about? It's hard enough as it is. Why don't you take them with you and make them disciples too?" After listening to the ravings of a madman, Chun said with complete indifference in his voice, "I don't remember your name, but we'll talk about your behavior later." And that's when the head of the swordsmanship department stepped in. His new swordsmanship was not inferior to Chun's. Walking up to the master, the head of the faculty said, "I understand that you are being considerate of the student, but don't forget that the safety of all the students is at stake." Seeing Master Chun's hesitation, Jin said, "Master, I find it hard to explain the reason, but if we can appease their resentment, we will clear the dungeon without a fight." Hearing this, the head of the faculty laughed like a real psychopath and said, "You're talking about sending souls to heaven? You're funny. Do you really believe that?" In the many years that Chung had been an adventurer, he had grown accustomed to trusting not only his eyes, but also his senses and skills. So he decided to mop up the dungeon while trying not to get into a fight. It must be said that such a decision is far out of favor with the head of the department by his best student. And then, the head of the faculty approached Chun, discreetly took his sword by the hilt and said, "I heard you, and understands everything perfectly. But the body is so eager to go forward. Holy shit. It was too arrogant to think you could convince a man who only thinks in terms of guns, no facts." With a single swing of his sword, the head of the swordsmanship department killed a dozen souls. After he did that, the souls disappeared. To be honest, the head of the fencing department was a very bad person. He had a violent temper. After killing the spirits, he turned to Master Chun. "Hey Dad, are you willing to take responsibility for the threat that hung over the students?" After seeing the spirits die, Jin became desperate. And the reason for this, far from a failed mission, now all his friends are in mortal danger. "Head of the faculty, I think you've forgotten who is leading the trek into this dungeon," replied Chun. And then from behind me, Han whimpered like a pathetic mongrel. "Be alert and hostile to all creatures in the dungeon." You wrote that sentence yourself, am I right? Turning around, the master said, "You again. Snot, do you even know what the consequences are for disobeying the orders of the dungeon leaders?" Khan was literally petrified at those words. The adventurer would face life imprisonment for such a misdemeanor, and that at best. Meanwhile, the genie received a notice that the plot had taken an unexpected turn, and the difficulty of this dungeon has increased. After a couple of minutes, footsteps and silhouettes began to be heard, and the closer the silhouettes got to the students, the clearer the words were heard. "Kill friends, kill friends, kill friends." For ordinary students, the whole situation was quite strange. They didn't understand why Principal Chung was so worried about what had happened, when suddenly one of the students began to notice that the fog was getting thicker and thicker. Soon, the fog became too thick. Only Chun and Jin understood the real reason for this, but it's too late to do anything about it. The spirits have become enraged and have declared a hunt for the living, all because of that asshole head of the swordsmanship department. After that, Jin's mission changed its name from Scream Night to Nightmare Night. Seeing the crowd of embittered spirits, the students immediately realized that Chun and Jin were right. Even Han and the head of the faculty have admitted they were wrong, but their admissions mean nothing. It's too late.
The spirit's resentment has been replaced by anger and a desire to kill.
Karma didn't take long to set in. For the murder, the spirits punished the head of the faculty with asphyxiation, and Chun and Jin warned them. Just as suddenly the director said, "Siren Seams, drag him to the edge. It will be a problem if he dies here." For Chun, it's just an order. But for Saren, it's the mission of a lifetime. After all, it was given by the father of adventurers. Since now the situation has completely changed, Chun decides to join the fight. Suddenly, Jin stops him and says, "Master, what you're about to hear is going to sound strange. But listen, killing them won't help. Let me handle this. I know this dungeon better than anyone here. Just realize, the more you attack them, the stronger and more aggressive they'll become. Like you, I want to save students from my friends. All I used to do was get help from my friends. Now it's time for me to return the favor, just trust me," Jin added. Put all the situations together, Jin's words sounded absolutely stupid. But the sincerity and confidence of our hero bought the master, so he let him handle it himself. But before he did, he gave Jin his ring. It was a ring of illusion. It can change the user's appearance with mana, as well as create clones. Jin felt insanely good about it. But he didn't understand why the teacher was giving him the ring. And then, Chun said with a smile on his face, "I take it you don't want to reveal your power to the others. Play the part to the end." Jin said he'd totally figure it out on his own, but after turning spirits into evil spirits, the odds dropped a lot. However, our hero felt that it was up to him to sort it all out, because no matter how you look at it, he's the reason those kids are who they are today. It's all about the fact that in Jin's story, these spirits of the children were cast and became lives and shields during the war. They were left without parents and died alone, all because of the war, but because of the demons. They continued to suffer, even after death. But their crystal-clear souls remained kind to people. That's why these spirits don't need to be killed. They just need to be pacified, and send them to their eternal rest. And to do it, our hero used the ring his teacher gave him, and the skill of immersion. And he was immersed in a man named Michael Condor. Michael, a man who spent his childhood under the tutelage of priests in a small temple. When he became a priest himself, he received a revelation from the Bearer of Light. Because of this, he has saved countless souls outside the temple. Before, Jin had no problem immersing himself in low-level priests. But Michael, a higher-level priest, he's not sure he can handle it. But everything happened even better than Jin had planned. Instead of Michael, he met the Light Bearer. This is an angel named Prina. She's one of the few who can give people divine powers. All this time, Aiden watched from the sidelines. But when Prina appeared, he couldn't help but intervene. The thing is, Prina was very close to Eden. She was literally like a mother to him. Well, this is far from over. Prina activated her divine prayer skill, thus empowering Jin. By combining immersion with the illusion ring, Jin, in addition to Michael's power, also gained his appearance. This is the first time a genie has dived into such a strong character. And you have to admit, it's perfect. Chun watched everything that was happening without taking his eyes off. Involuntarily, he shouted out, "This skill!" He had used it in the first lesson. But this time, it's much more powerful. How did he become so powerful in just 2 weeks? Indeed, the divine light that emanated from Michael, or rather Jin, was so strong that only a Chun-level adventurer could look at it. Thanks to Michael's power, the genie cleaned the environment of pollution and began to accumulate divine energy all around. Chun was convinced once again that Jin was not just a talented child, but a real monster. After accumulating enough divine energy, Jin activated the Cleansing Rain skill. It's a rain that's perfectly safe for ordinary people, and a cure for all lost souls. Such is the power of the priest Michael. No demon or unclean spirit has ever survived an encounter with him. I apologize for the picture quality. Let's continue. Yuna, Siren, and Kang were really excited by what they saw. But they didn't understand where the Holy Spirit came from. Scream Night. These children became evil spirits because of their mistake. Originally, this was an episode that memorializes the hard fate of the dead, the genie back in front of them. Like the author of this story, he's the one responsible for the peace of those poor children. Through divine power, Jin showed each spirit a lifetime-long illusion, where everyone had a happy life with children and grandchildren. It was the only thing he could do for them. These illusions even made the poor spirits cry. In the end, their souls knew peace and departed to another world. Scream Night is cleared. The dive is broken. Jin's body was unable to withstand such a force, so the recoil was forcibly increased, causing our hero to lose consciousness. After sending souls to the next world, Jin increased his rank and all skills by 1 level. He also discovered an improved mana system. The maximum amount of energy that can be released at a time is doubled. But most importantly, Prina will now be watching our hero. After diving into Michael, Jin's body received a violent recoil. after which he lost consciousness. It's still hard for a genie to use that kind of power even for a short period of time. Chun was very worried about his student. After all, he had never seen a power that caused such side effects before. Seeing Jin's condition, Chun shouted, "Quickly, he must be taken to the hospital. Request a recovery potion from the association." But evil spirits aren't the only danger in this dungeon. The biggest threat is still Everton. Unfortunately, Jin-ne had time to tell the master about the impending shipment before he passed out. Everton, attacked unexpectedly from the darkness. But such pathetic tricks won't work on an adventurer like Chung. Due to the fact that the adventurer was holding Jin's body in his arms, he couldn't dodge this attack, but only blocked it. Turning around, out of the dense forest, he saw a group of men in dark cloaks. He shouted, "Who the hell are you?" And then one of these strangers looked up and said, "It doesn't matter. Give me the 8th hero, unless you want to die. It's clear by now that there's no way to avoid a fight." And since Jin is unconscious, Chun decided to fight alone, especially since he needs to save his students. Seeing the students carrying Jin away, the stranger yelled in a demonic voice, "Idiots! I'm not letting anyone get out of here alive!" by eliminating the most daring of them all. Chung said, "You know, I have no desire to linger here either." "Attack at the same time," added the adventurer. "He's the strongest hero alive after all." I think the Demon Fans group will be an easy warm-up for him. How their battle ended was easy enough to understand. It had been 3 whole days. Jin finally opened his eyes. All these days, Chun has stayed by his bedside, waiting for him to wake up, only after regaining consciousness. In a sleepy and very weak voice, Jin asked how everything went in the dungeon, if all the students were safe. Hearing this question, Chun smiled and replied, "Well, the Holy Spirit appeared in front of us and saved everyone." "You're doing great! Everyone was scared for you when you fainted. Don't do that again, please." "I thought you had died from your own abilities," Chun added and laughed. Suddenly, the smile disappeared from the master's face and changed to a sullen look. And then he muttered, "Now, let's get to the bad news. Why didn't you tell your parents you quit the academy?" "I was unaware and blabbed," Chun said with a laugh. Jin's mood swings almost made him faint because he thought something had happened to his friends. After calming down a bit, Jin said, "Damn, old man, they're gonna kill me now." "Who are you calling an old man?" "It's your own fault, you little brat," Chun replied. Right after his wife was released from the hospital, he decided to come to his parents' house. The last time he was home was when he was at the academy, and since then, it's been about 2 years. Now that Jun has blabbed to his parents, there's a lot of talking and explaining to do. His parents were overjoyed when their son entered the academy. They even made a poster congratulating him. It's too late to think about it. It's done. It's time to take responsibility for your actions. Well, either way, Jean will always have time to apologize. And that's the way it's going to be. But when Jean walked into the house, he saw a festive table. And a happy mother. Something that couldn't be said for his father. Something, but certainly not the celebration Jean had expected to encounter. It was the first time in 2 years that Jean had eaten healthy food for the first time. After so long, he's forgotten how good his mom's cooking is. Suddenly, father said, "Son, not only did you skip class, you've also left the academy. I can't believe you worked so hard to get in. But why did you have to go to the dungeon? It's too dangerous," added my father. And then my mom intervened. "Son, maybe you can find a simple job in a safe place." I was so scared when I heard that 2 months ago there was a dungeon nearby, and his father suggested that he stay home and not go out. But it was the word of a new dungeon that caught Jean's attention. One he'd never heard of before. The thing is, this dungeon appeared at exactly the same moment that Jean's novel became real, which means this dungeon is also from his stories. After supper, when his parents had gone to bed, Jin sneaked out instead of where his mother had told him the dungeon was, and decided to find it. But when he arrived, he found nothing. And that's where the skill he learned at the academy, mana detection, came in handy. Usually, this skill acts within a radius of 10 meters, but because of the hero's mana. Now the detection radius is about 1 kilometer. So our hero got information about everything, plants and even animals, within a kilometer radius. Luckily, Eden came on the line and explained everything to him. Among thousands of useless windows of information, Jin found what he was looking for. Exactly the entrance to the dungeon. Well, there happens to be a new dungeon. The adventurers don't know much about it. Also, more certainty was added by the fact that this dungeon was a low-level dungeon. Jin is, of course, alarmed that a low-level dungeon looks like a high-level dungeon. But it's unlikely that the system is wrong. Welcome to the Adventurers Association, the Judicial Department. This is where the commas go through all the MEs and monsters and stuff like that. The thing was, after the battle in the dungeon, Chun wanted to know a little more about the attackers, but he had no information other than the mysterious sign, and he couldn't even guess where the sign came from. Chun's interest in the attackers was because they wanted to take some 8th hero. The adventurer couldn't get enough of those words. Back to our hero. When he saw the dungeon, Jin thought for a long time whether to enter it or not. Suddenly, Eden came on the line and said, "Why are you standing there like a stone? This is a low-level dungeon. Don't tell me you're scared. You weren't scared." He was just thinking about everything that could happen. The thought that if he went into this dungeon alone, the difficulty would increase, just like last time, was the one that alarmed him the most. As suddenly, instead of the violet windows of Eden, a golden one appeared. When the genie saw it, he shouted in surprise, "Is that you, the source of light?" But then a girl wrote, "Don't call me that. It's a horrible name. Just call me Prina." Jin understood exactly why he could talk to Eden, but he didn't know he could talk to other heroes. When suddenly the girl texted Jin not to hesitate to enter the dungeon, because she believes in him. Well, I'd have to say Prina is quite different from Eden. After thinking it over, Jin saw no good reason not to enter this dungeon. Besides, it was near his parents' house, so it would be better if he cleared it quickly. And then there's a loud alarm clock. When he hears the alarm clock, the genie panics and looks around, not understanding. After all, he was sure he had just entered the dungeon. Was it really a dream? Looking around, then noticed the final grades for the month daughter and the tables from the academy. Had this dungeon brought him back in time? Sad in the fact that this dungeon goes through an individual's past and memories. Beginning to love after his room, the genie moved on to the academy, for fencing class. Despite the fact that this is a low-level dungeon, it is very different from all the others. After all, it's not clear what to do here at all. I would have been glad to watch everything going on around him. Jin realized that the dungeon had moved him to take his final evaluation for the month. It was on that day that Han beat up our hero. That's when he decided to quit the academy. Once he was here, Jin had only one question. Why? Why had he been moved here? And why all this? For some unknown reason, such a barrage of memories from the academy plunged the genie into sheer terror. He was literally numb with fright, and the dungeon system sensed it, and based on that fear, it decided to imitate the person Jin had feared in the past. It all makes sense. Now I can see why this dungeon is called the Path of Choice. Suddenly, Jin felt an aura behind him. After a few seconds, it was Aura who took the form of Khan. The same cocky and arrogant one from his days at the academy. The principle behind this dungeon is simple and interesting. But now Jin is outmatched by Khan by a factor of 2. So he should be pretty easy to deal with. The only problem is that Jin was terrified. This Han doesn't know what our hero is capable of. But he crushed Jin morally. Many people underestimate the power of fear. It is because of this that Jin is now completely unprepared to fight the Khan, and the environment around her contributed to that. After all, Jin is still just a kid. At the sight of Khan in front of him, Jin whispered, "Fear is my weakness. There is no need to be afraid. It's just a normal illusion created by the dungeon. Calm down, Jin. That's just a regular Han from 2 years ago. Think of who he is now, what a lowlife he's become." I must say it helped, and Jin was able to calm down. Well, it's time to clean up this dungeon. The most important thing is not to give in to Khan's provocations. Otherwise, fear will envelop him again. But Jin had a better plan. He decided to attack Khan with his own weapons, by activating the mana flow. D began to emit a blue glow. Suddenly he said, "I'm glad you're the idiot I know, and today I'm going to teach you a lesson." But for some reason, this time the dive failed. While in this dungeon, Jin can't utilize his hidden potential. Taking advantage of our hero's confusion, Han attacked him without the slightest hesitation. On the ground, the Khan laughed and shouted, "Look at that! The flea has learned to use its mouth. Too bad you didn't learn to fight like that. And for that insolence, I will not kill you quickly. But I will abuse you as long as I like." Han added, "Han, he's tried every punch he's ever thrown at the genie, from the tornado swing to the anaconda kick. Unfortunately, without immersion, Jin is in no position to stand up to Khan. And even when Jin was lying on the floor, passed out, Han had no intention of stopping. He was really enjoying torturing Jin, and missed another punch. Jin passed out. Seeing this, Han laughed and said, "Hey, are you knocked out already? Too bad it's going to end like this." Eden, watch the fight from the beginning. Video of Jin getting beaten up by a pathetic loser. He yelled, "What's the matter? It's not like you." But in this dungeon, Communication with all the heroes was also inaccessible. So everything Eden Jin didn't hear what Eden Jin said. It's back to square one. Jin is a blank slate and has no unique abilities. He was beginning to believe he was stuck in this dungeon for the rest of his life. After all, he can't defeat Khan without the ability. When suddenly, Jin got a message from Eden. But how can that be possible, since communication with heroes as well as skills in this dungeon are blocked? Jin couldn't believe his eyes. All this time he thought he was alone, when suddenly Eden said with desperation in his voice, "I am ashamed of you. I didn't know you'd give up so easily. Where's the guy who came back from the dead in my tower? Or you're so scared of this guy that you fell down after a couple measly punches. It's just an illusion, but you can't even get up." Not wanting to hear the truth, Jin shouted, "Shut up, shut your mouth. It's hard for me you don't know anything about it." Jin hated himself for giving up. So he created Eden, a hero who never gives up, because he wanted to be like that. He wanted to be, but he couldn't. Gathering his remaining strength into a fist, Jin stood up and said, "Eden, just wait a bit, I'll be done soon." When Han heard that, he thought he hit the genie too hard on the head. And because of that, he's talking nonsense. Khan had had enough of beating up Jin, so he decided to end their fight with one punch. The genie, too, had had enough of this fight. So he waited until Han was close enough and punched him right in the jaw. After talking to Eden, Jinu was much better tired, and he finally came to his senses. Even though he didn't have a unique skill, he had raised his swordsmanship level to the maximum while training with Chun. After the karma of such a humiliating blow, Khan's demeanor changed drastically, and his eyes began to glow red. Suddenly he shouted, "How dare you! You think you can handle it because I gave in a little? You'll crawl out of this ring a cripple!" Genie used to hear about Han's unique skill that boosts his speed to unimaginable heights, but he didn't think the speed would be so fast that Han would be literally invisible. As soon as Jin saw Khan's silhouette, he attacked. But as soon as the sword started to move, Khan disappeared. Granted, Jin can't use immersion, but he can still use mana. And to sense Han's approach, you can use the detection skill, which, under the buff, can anticipate the movement of the enemy. Thanks to the hero's mom, the detection skill can run for a while without stopping. That should be just enough time for Jin to defeat Khan. After Jin repelled Khan's attack, he shouted, "Why my skills don't work against a worthless opponent like you? This is bullshit. Ready to die everything," added the Khan, and threw himself at Jin. If he'd done the same thing 2 years ago, it would have worked. But things are different now. Jin is no longer the loser that everyone else thought he was. He's now one of the greatest heroes of all time, one that had not yet reached its full potential. As he fought the genie, Han felt an aura of terrifying power, and when he looked closely, he saw the silhouette of an Aiden. Losing his guard for a second, Jin ended the fight with a single swing of his sword. Now it's just a matter of time. It's just a matter of putting an end to their rivalry. Han was truly horrified at what had happened. Turning around, he said in a trembling voice, "You are not Jin. But who are you? How can you have such power? I'm the guy named Jeans that you thought was trash and garbage. The thing is, I'm not afraid of you anymore. From now on, the real Han will fear Jin on a subconscious level." And since Jin had conquered his greatest fear, that dungeon, the path of choice, was successfully cleared. Jin managed to get home before his parents woke up, and the next morning they sent him back to town again. Recently, things have been going extremely well for our hero. After all, at least he managed to prevent the monster invasion. As it should be for clearing the dungeon, Jin was given a reward. Amusingly, the award was his own Roman. But thanks to this reward, Jenny will be able to find out the information he needs at any time, connected to all the dungeons that have appeared because of him. But due to the author being too low, Jin is not yet able to access all the features of this award, whatever that means. It's quite funny that he's not available any information because he's the only author of his novels. But still, since he'll be able to read his book again, it will help him in situations where he can remember what he wrote. When, suddenly, Yuna crept up behind him and said, "Hey, why are you sitting like that? What are you looking at? It's just a black screen." The girl's jeans. He was startled by the sudden appearance of the girl. After all, she was supposed to be at the academy at this time. The girl was embarrassed and said, "Don't swear, but I decided to follow your example and quit studying too." Well, despite the girl's request, Jin still got angry and started yelling at her. But Yuna is not the kind of girl to raise her voice for no reason. In response to yelling, she started yelling too. That it's her business, that it's her own business. When suddenly Khan comes up to them and asks why they're not yelling at each other. When he saw Kang and Jin wearing a tracksuit, he shouted, "Kang, did you drop out too? You're crazy!" It was actually a pretty stupid move on their part. After all, if they had graduated from the academy, they would have gotten a lot of advantages. Besides, they were the best students in the entire academy. When suddenly Yuna said, "Don't worry about it. We decided it ourselves. But now we can study for the adventurers' exams together." "Oh yeah, I almost forgot. That gentleman said we could use the training room together," Yuna added. "Now it all makes sense. That's what I thought. I thought the Chun was involved." Seeing Jin's dissatisfaction with everything that was going on, Kang said, "She was right. That gentleman was very nice. I don't think you understand him. He also allowed us to plan our own training." But those words only made Jin more angry. It wasn't that he didn't like Chun at all. He just thought he was really crazy. Meanwhile, Chun was learning more and more about the Everton group. The other day, his men apprehended a man who was drawing the same symbol that Chung found on the bodies of the attackers. This isn't the first time Chun's men have been apprehended for such crimes, and all of them spoke of the coming of a demon. There are too many people lately to ignore as a petty cult. We must stop their development before it's too late. But Chun still couldn't get enough of their symbol. It was literally everywhere, and it was getting bigger and bigger every day. Chun was still trying to figure out how the mysterious eighth hero was related to the demon. But one thing was clear now. This group had appeared together with the emergence of the 7 new towers. The more Chung thought about it, the more the puzzle came together. The appearance of the 7 towers, and 7 so-called heroes. But it was the 8th that the demon worshippers were after. The father of adventurers. There's still a lot to find out. In the meantime, back to the genie, who has decided to stock up on new items. Jean walked back and forth all over the store, but he couldn't find anything to buy. Suddenly he heard from behind him, "You're Mr. Jin." Jin turned around and saw a man in a suit in front of him. His face seemed very familiar, but he couldn't remember where he'd seen him before. As suddenly, a man held out a business card and said, "I heard that you recently awakened. Congratulations. You might remember me? I'm the representative of the Paradise Palace Guild. We once offered you a job as an analyst. I hear you're taking good care of Mrs. Yuna. Thank you very much," added the stranger. Gina laughed and replied, "No, she takes good care of me. You may have forgotten, but Yuna is the daughter of the guild leader, so that's why the stranger asked about it. But that's not the reason he came here. He wanted to offer Jeannie a job in their guild after he passed the adventurer exam. Jeans, it was a pleasure that a guild like this would want to work with him. But he refused for the sole reason that he didn't want to work for his friend's family." Upon hearing this, the man politely said goodbye and left. But during the conversation, Jin felt a strange aura radiating from him. Suddenly, Eden came on the line. He wondered why such a guild wanted to work together with Jin. Being filled with optimism, Jin smiled and shouted, "Isn't it obvious I'm a genius?" Meanwhile, the stranger who offered Jin the job almost passed out in the elevator. The point is that he spent too much energy using his unique Eye of Truth skill. It wasn't the first time he tried to calculate Jin's abilities with his skill. Just like the last time, it had failed. But you can't say he didn't learn anything at all. He sensed the limitless potential for energy and power. That's hidden in our hero. And then he decided he had to get close to the genie at any cost, to fulfill his superior's expectations. Because lately, Jin has been communicating a lot with Eden and Prina. He bought himself a wireless earpiece, so he wouldn't look stupid. After leaving the store, Jin wanted to go get something to eat, while Prina reprimands him for his unwise waste of money. But his plans changed abruptly when Jin spotted an object with the energy of an Everton. It was too risky to use the detection skill in front of people. So Jin decided to go outside and only then activate it. By finding a hiding place, proceeded to locate the cursed object. Jin looked around floor by floor, but everywhere was clear, not a single trace of monster or demon. And then he decided to check out the basement, and bingo, the cursed object was there. With Vasile's detection skill, Jin recognized the exact location of the cursed object. It was lying in the box from the fire extinguisher. Surprisingly, Jin had no trouble breaking into the basement of the mall by opening the right drawer. He said the tainted aura didn't come from the object, it was from the seal. Everton's magic circle is mainly used to summon the demon, and it can only be removed with the help of holy water. Luckily, holy water in case of danger was in Jin's measuring bracelet. Thanks to Brina's knowledge, a Jin can make any water holy without immersion. It must have been placed by someone low level. It only took a couple drops of holy water to remove it, even though the system said it was clean. But Jin decided to check again, see if there were any curses left in the mall. But now, Jin wasn't just looking for cursed things. He was looking for Everton's markings. He scanned everything within a kilometer radius, and the results were shocking. He found over a dozen tags, and that's just the ones in the neighborhood. When the scan was complete, Jin found as many as 172 tags within a kilometer radius. It's hard to imagine how many of them there were then, in the whole city. But one thing is clear now. Everton is now the biggest threat to mankind. The news that Jin had begun the destruction of their magic circles quickly reached the top of Everton, when suddenly one of them said the 8th hero would be a big obstacle to our plan. We have to get rid of him before it's too late. And judging from the fact that he was able to easily remove our seal, we can conclude that he has divine power in this case. We should destroy him while there's still time. Right now, however, we can't get too close to him. However, Everton was sure that despite everything, the 8th hero wouldn't be able to clear the entire city. And then one of the high priests said, "Besides, if the seeds are threatened, God's apostles will protect them." Jin spent over 10 hours removing every possible marker. Based on his Roman, it became clear to Jin that if there were so many circles here, then the curse seed must be nearby. The so-called curse seed and magic circles are required to summon a demon. If the seed is sown in a person and his mana is used as a vessel, the demon will be born in this seed. But alone, Jin can't clear the whole city of seals, especially when they appear every day. So, he decided to ask Master Chun for help. But first, it's worth finding the person in whom the seed has already been planted, to avoid disaster. When suddenly Jin's thoughts were interrupted by Saren, who had just walked into the coffee shop. The girl didn't expect to see Jin so soon after what happened on the tour, but as she passed a coffee shop, she saw a guy who looked like a genie and decided to see if it was him. And as a thank you for saving a whole group of students, the girl wanted to buy the genie a drink. While talking Saren, Jin felt something strange, like there were two hearts in her. Jin immediately realized that Saren had the seed of the curse in her. But the only question is whether Jin can heal her as well as Yuna. After all, Yuna was just under the influence of dark mana, feeling the curse on her friend. Jin said, "Saren, urgently, give me your hand. I have to check something." As soon as their hands touched, the girl felt a sharp pain, as if she'd been electrocuted. Upon touching Saren, Jin was notified that he had discovered the source of the cursed seed. The pain must have been caused by the seed's reaction to the divine power Jin possessed. There was no doubt that the seed of the apocalypse was in Cyrene, but when it had time to penetrate her, maybe it was during the dungeon crawl, then the seed had enough time to stabilize. Luckily, the seed was still at a low stage of development. The seed has not yet had time to fuse with the Saren mana core, so it can be removed. It could be a lot simpler than Jin had imagined. If the family was even in the middle stages of development, it's a lot harder. And if there was a demon at all, the fight would not be easy. Because cursed seeds are kind of like plants. They can be killed by poison. And for them, poison is a divine power. When she saw that Jin was covered in a golden aura, Saren cried out in horror, "Appa, what are you doing? I'm scared." "Michaela, don't worry. It's gonna hurt a little. But I'll get it over with once and for all," replied Jin. When all of a sudden, there was a loud, disgusting laughter. When Jin turned around, he saw a guy in a suit who said, "You're funny, but this isn't going to work." Immediately afterward, there was a massive explosion that blew out all the windows in the coffee shop. "You think you're going to ruin our plans again, you cheeky bastard? You should have been punished a long time ago." The stranger came in, and from the look of him alone, it was clear that he belonged to Everton. Without thinking long, the demon attacked Jin. His speed was astounding, I had to admit. Just a moment ago, he'd been 20 meters away. Jin, already prepared to fight. Suddenly, there was a loud pop. Thank goodness it was Chun. Just in time, he found Jin. I never cease to be amazed at how strong he is. To throw a monster so far away with one blow. "You mongrel, how dare you attack my student?" Jin, of course, was insanely glad that Chun had come. But he didn't understand why he had come now. They had agreed to meet in an hour. It's very simple. Chun finished work early and decided to wait for the Jin in the coffee shop. Suddenly, Chun shouted, "Take your friend. Go to the safe place. I'll deal with this guy." Out of a cloud of dust, a wild laughter sounded. Just as suddenly, he stopped, and the attacker said in a demonic voice, "Will you deal with it? It's funny to watch this. But I recognize your strength, Father Adventurer." From such a blow, a normal S rank would have dropped dead by now. Chung was shocked to see his attacker unharmed. After all, he was sure he heard the crunch of his neck. He was sure he had heard the crunching of his neck. "Ah, I forgot where my manners are. Allow me to introduce myself as the Apostle of Amol, Satan's faithful servant. Unable to bear it, Chun shouted, "So you, one of the idiots who worships demons?" But he was no ordinary priest. He is an apostle who received a great blessing from Satan. Suddenly, Amol said, "Unlike your god, our god answers please." "Okay, I've wasted too much time on you. Let's get this party started soon." Immediately afterward, Jin felt a sharp headache, something akin to the recoil effect after a dive. It was all because over 1,000 pre-prepared magic circles began to resonate simultaneously. Jin couldn't believe his eyes. After all, he was sure he had removed more than half of the circles, but there were still too many left. It turns out that all this time Amol has just been stalling. Now we need to remove at least some seeds. And we should start with Saren. What the hell? She's gone. Could it be that Jin was too late? Did the resonance of the circles trigger the accelerated germination process of the seed? About demons, there's one very interesting thing to know. More than anything, they don't like to kill people. No, they like people to be afraid. And, demon awakening truly terrifies ordinary people, thereby infusing it with incredible strength and energy. But for some unknown reason, he started taking the souls of people who didn't have mana. Remembering his novel, Jin realized that these souls were necessary to awaken the demon. And if all those souls were to be absorbed into Saren, the real devil would come to the world. The only thing that can save humanity from this is to rid Saren of the seed before it's too late. Hey hero, don't do anything stupid, it's too late, it's done. The process of the uprising is almost complete, and there's nothing to be done about it. Soon the devil will come to this world, said Amol. Chung, tired of listening to this nonsense, shouted, "You're a piece of feces! What the hell are you talking about?" "What devil? Why are you acting like an idiot at your age? All this nonsense like it's from a nerd novel." And, Chung was right. It's all from Jin's novel, but now it is absolutely not important. After listening to the master, Amol smiled and said, "Do you really want to die so badly? If you have any hidden power, then show what you can do." The funny thing was that Chuna wasn't frightened by all this nonsense about the devil and the end of the world. On the contrary, it even added to his excitement. For now, Amol was busy fighting Chin. Jin saw an opportunity to rid Saren of the seed. But then, Jin smelled a horrible odor. It could only mean one thing. And the demon rose up before the Aiden and the heroes. And they smelled the foul odor of decaying bodies and blood. The odor was the same as Ji had described it when it first appeared, which meant that Amol was right. And there was no saving Saren. One of his closest friends, someone Jin had known since he was a child, turned into a demon through his own fault. Jin was devastated because he knew that if it wasn't for his Roman, this would all have been fine. Coming closer, he said in a trembling voice, "Saren, do you recognize me?" The demon stared at Jin's face for a long time. Suddenly he said, "Who are you?" The demon's voice was completely different, as if from another world. It was like the scraping of metal, just like Jin's story. I wonder if he's really reached the point of no return. There's no way to save a man who's become a demon, but the blame for what happened lies squarely with the genie, so he must stop her now before more people die. I think it's not hard to guess that the demon can only be fought with holy energy. By activating the immersion, Jin regained Michael's powers and placed the demon in a sacred cage, which blocks all of the monster's powers. Fortunately, the demon had not yet gained enough strength to resist the divine energy, and Jin judged him in the name of God. This divine spell destroys demons that have invaded the target's body. Once complete, the demon would disappear, just like its vessel. Jin couldn't control his feelings. He began to cry, because of the guilt he felt for Siren. But it was the only way to stop the demon, and avoid 1,000 deaths. Wait, why isn't she completely gone? Just her head, it didn't work. Looks like Jin underestimated the demon. Even Michael's strength wasn't enough to send it back, only to stun it for a while. Damn it, the demon is even faster than the Amel. But why didn't the divine spell work? Meanwhile, Chun was fighting with the apostle when suddenly a huge explosion sounded behind him, based on the flash and the direction of the blast. He realized that the explosion was coming from the same direction as the children. He couldn't just let anything happen to them, so he had to turn his back on a mole. And a demon is a demon. He decided to seize the opportunity and kill the Chun, if this fight is going to take another life. I guess I wrote him off too soon. A lot of combat experience is evident. He knew that as soon as he turned his back, a mole would take advantage of it. Then he could counterattack him and knock a mole into the ground like a bug. How fucking resilient he is. I'm starting to wonder if he's even killable. Back to the genie. I think this is the end of his adventure. Surviving a one-on-one encounter with a demon is unlikely. In his defense, he did everything in his power. I can feel the nearness of death. Jin began to blame himself for being too weak, and because of him, all of humanity was in danger, and Saren has become the demon's puppet. All because of him. He held on to the last of it, but tears began to run down his cheeks, and then he whispered, "Saren, please come back. Please." When suddenly a demonic voice said, "Appa, what's wrong?" Only one human called Jin that, and it was Saren. Jin couldn't believe his ears. He thought it was a hallucination of intense fear. It can't be. Her soul must be completely destroyed after becoming a demon. But why she's still conscious and in control of her body? It's all about still not losing the battle for once. The seed may have sprouted and the demon reborn, but Saren is still alive. She just needs to find a way out of here. This place seemed like hell to her. The last thing she remembers is being attacked by a stranger in a cafe. But along with her, there were the souls of those the demon had taken. To demons, these souls are just food, nothing more. Fortunately, the girl, not confused by seeing the demonic claw grabbing people, she applied her unique ability, the world of ice. It was because of this ability. Saren became one of the best students in the academy. She was able to save people from the demon's clutches. But what do we do next? The girl herself would have been glad to know where she was and what to do next. But she decided to act according to the situation. Remember when Jin used holy energy to kill the demon? Well, that holy energy was able to save Saren, but again, it wasn't clear what to do next, when suddenly she heard Jin's voice telling her to come back. Then the rift appeared in front of her and she saw him. Meanwhile, Jin was still trying to figure out how Saren was still alive, because there was nothing like that in his book. I wonder if he missed something, when suddenly the demon took control of my body again and said, "How dare you interfere with my dinner? I'll deal with you later." And then, Jin noticed a strange symbol on the demon's palm. It burned a bright golden color. What if Jin gave some of his divine power to Saren and it's helping her stay alive? And if that theory is correct, then Jin's attacks are divinely empowered to awaken the girl's consciousness. It's just a theory, but it's a theory that there's a chance that Saren can be brought back, and Jin has no intention of letting that chance slip away. But this time, diving into Michael didn't work. Jin was running low on mana. Seeing this, the demon didn't miss the moment that he said hello. Laughing, he said, "Oh, you just look already near the hero ran out of mana. You can't stop me anymore." Why is it that every time Jin's power is needed, he is powerless? When suddenly Jin felt a sudden surge of strength, and his mana reserves began to replenish dramatically. What happened? A second later, our hero received a notification that the Shepherd of Light of the Seven Heroes was transferring his power to him. Prina. I don't know why she's doing this. Now Jin was and is insanely grateful, because now he has enough mana to perform a Michael dive. Jin decided to act for sure, and in addition to Michael's strength, he also summoned his weapon. With Michael's holy sword, judgment on behalf of God is guaranteed to send the demon back to the underworld. And there's the slightest chance that Saren and the men will be unharmed. When suddenly, the photo tape began to burst out of the demon, the kind used in the last century. On them were all of Saren's memories, from childhood to the present day. When suddenly, all these memories began to envelop Jin, and pulling him into the darkness. Opening his eyes, Jin found himself together where Saren had been all along. It's a place, a kind of dungeon from the soul in a girl's mind. For many, this place will be even worse than hell. Looking around, Jin found the girl. However, she was unconscious and suspended 40 meters high. As soon as he saw her, he screamed, "Saren, I'm here! Wake up!" And now that he was near, the claw that held the girl began to rise sharply. It's like someone's playing catch-up with our hero. But even so, Jin wasn't going to stop. All he had to do to get Saren back was touch her and give her a piece of holy energy. And yet he did it, taken, and infuse it with holy energy. Thanks to Jin, the girl was able to escape the demon's clutches. But it's fair to say that he's the reason she's in there too. A demon, on the other hand, would not be able to exist after such an amount of holy energy inside the vessel. After the demon was completely gone, all the people's souls went back into their bodies. It could be said that Jin had corrected his mistake. On the loose, Saren fainted, but that's the least of what could happen.
Now all we have to do is figure out what to do with what's left of the demon.
Guys, if you've seen this video to the end, write the word magic in the comments, and then I'll know you liked the video. If this video gets over 100,000 views and 5,000 likes, I'll do a second part. Thank you and goodbye.